What's up, guys? Beautiful day, isn't it? It is tipping down. I hope you can hear me over the noise of the rain on the umbrella. But I hope you've all had a good week and a good weekend since I last spoke to you. Thank you very much, as ever, for all of the questions for this week's Ask Elvis. It is now Monday, Q&A Monday. So roll the sting. Two very soggy dogs and one soggy Elvis as well. But loads of great questions, so let's get into them. Stephen Chan says, how much does a test driver really know about the secrets of an F1 car, or is he just a sim setup driver? And he's talking about Kvyat. If Kvyat goes back to Toro Rosso, how much will they benefit from that? How much does he know about that Ferrari car that he's been testing for a while? And will Red Bull benefit from all of that? Well, it varies enormously depending on the team and the driver. If I think back to some of our test drivers, Pedro de la Rosa, Alex Wurz, Olivier Panis before that at McLaren, they were hugely involved in the sort of design process and the development process of the cars. They were massively part of that process in terms of developing things. They were very, very hands-on because, of course, back then we had a lot more track testing. Nowadays, of course, it has changed slightly, and there's a lot more simulation, a lot more kind of CFD modelling that goes into the development process, and far less track testing. So the driver, in that sense, I guess, is slightly less involved to a hands-on perspective. But I think a lot of it depends on the driver itself. Some drivers much prefer to be really, really involved in that side of things. Others prefer to be just given a car with certain bits on it, drive it, and then give their opinion on what it feels like. So I don't know is the true answer on what Kvyat is like in that sense, but it definitely can't hurt to have knowledge not only of the Ferrari car, but of how they kind of approach everything that they do at Ferrari. Because a different perspective from a different team can bring different ideas and different solutions to the problems that all Formula 1 teams face. So yes, absolutely, Red Bull and Toro Rosso could benefit from bringing Kvyat back from the Reds. Jakob Wikowski says, what do you think about the possibility of bringing bigger ground effects to future F1 cars? Could it help deliver better racing, and would it give more possibilities to drivers for following each other closely without damaging tyres? Well, this is a question that obviously gets asked quite a lot about what do we do about cars not being able to follow. We saw it in the Singapore Grand Prix quite dramatically, didn't we? Particularly Valtteri Bottas not being able to follow the Renault of Nico Hülkenberg and get anywhere near close enough to overtake, even though he had a much faster car. So the ground effect issue, or the ground effect conversation, has been going on for a while, and ground effect, if you don't know, is where most of the downforce is produced from the underfloor of the car, where the sides of the floor of the car are sealed, or very nearly sealed to the tarmac. We had them back in the sort of 70s, 80s, where we had these little side skirts dropping down off the side of the car that sealed the floor of the car to the floor of the racetrack, and creates this incredibly efficient underfloor section where the diffuser starts to suck the car down onto the tarmac and create downforce. Nowadays, of course, we rely largely on the wings. The diffuser still creates a lot of downforce, but the wings, largely the rear wing, creates a huge amount of downforce, but it also creates a huge amount of turbulent air behind it. Well, the ground effect process also creates a large amount of turbulence behind it. What it doesn't do is... oh, sorry, you just missed that. Pharrell just went to pick up a twig. Didn't realise it was attached to an enormous branch of a tree and tried to drag the whole lot along. The ground effect way of doing things, yes, it can be more efficient in terms of the turbulent wake that it throws out behind it, or throws a different shape turbulent wake behind it. I guess it doesn't allow any airflow to spill out from the underfloor, so we get less outwash, I guess, to some extent. But it's just a different problem. It's not necessarily that it completely fixes the issue, because it just creates slightly different issues. And actually, when we look back at the racing of the 70s and 80s, and we all say, well, it was so much better, cars could follow each other, it was easy, racing was great. I think it's a slightly blurred picture of what actually was happening back then, because yes, sometimes racing was great, sometimes it really wasn't. And other things have moved on so much in Formula One that actually it's not just as simple as going back to a ground effect type aero model to fix the racing problem. So the answer to your question is, it's not as simple as let's just go back to ground effect. Ross Brawn and his team have, and Pat Simmons and co at FOM, at Liberty, have actually been doing some pretty intensive studies on all of this, which is great. You know, they are looking into this seriously. They've got the teams involved. They're using CFD to really try and understand exactly what will work and what effects different aero concepts will have. And the 2021 concepts that were released just the other week are the results of some of those studies. So Ross Brawn and co have decided that with the 2021 concepts as they are now, the sort of aero drop-off for the following car is reduced massively from where we are right now. So currently cars following cars will lose around about 50% of their downforce when they get into the wake of a car in front of them. And they think that with this new concept, they can reduce that downforce loss down to about 20%, which is dramatic. That's huge. So that means that'll make a big difference to racing. And if that happens, well then that's fine, that's great, that's what we're after. So it doesn't really matter how we get to that point. What we all want is better racing. We want cars to be able to follow closely and have the ability to overtake. And if the guys who are studying the models and the wind tunnels and the CFD simulations, which are so detailed, if they say this is the way to go, we at least have to put our trust in that at this stage and then see what happens. Right. Amazing how it's brightened up. I mean, honestly, it's a beautiful day now, and when I shot that earlier bit out in the on the walk with the dogs, it was torrential, tipping down, dark. Amazing. Anyway, let's carry on, because some more great questions. I'll start with this one from Stuart Grindlay, who says, hi Mark, would you like to have done a race or a season working on the crew when the era of no pit lane speed limit existed? All this to add to the adrenaline that pumps around the body during a pit stop when an F1 car is doing 130 miles an hour plus just behind you. Well, I know that sounds terrifying, but you know what? Even when they were doing 70 miles an hour, which is what the pit lane speed limit was when I first started, I mean, that was terrifying. Still the noisy birds in the sky. It's still the scariest thing I've ever done, is a Formula One pit stop, you know, particularly that first ever one. And on that particular day I was standing at the front of the car, I was putting the new front wing and nose cone on because we'd had a nose change, and it's terrifying, hoping that he's going to stop at your ankles, like at the very last second, and because the brakes are so good, just a few metres from you, you're still doing 70 miles an hour. So that was always terrifying, and I'm sure if they were doing 120, 130 miles an hour, it would be even more so. But the answer to your question is I probably would have loved to have done it. And the reason I say that was because I absolutely loved that adrenaline rush. That was one of my favourite things about being a Formula One mechanic. And the thing that I still to this day miss most of all is pit stops. Because there's nothing that can replicate that adrenaline rush of the car tearing towards you, the heat coming off the brakes, sometimes the fire, the flames coming off the brakes, the smell, the noise. Particularly back in the day of the cars when they were sitting on the rev limiter waiting to leave at 21,000 RPM, you know, and you're this far away from it, it shakes your bones to pieces, and all that sounds horrific and horrendous, but I loved it. So yes, I probably would have loved to have done it, particularly as a young man that had no real major care in the world and no fear and no responsibility. I suppose as you get older you start to think differently about these things, but yeah, what an amazing experience that must have been. Ben Wouters, hope I pronounced that right, I'm sorry if it's wrong. I was wondering how they go about diagnosing any engine issues that may render the engine unusable. Do they just base their decision on oil analysis, and I assume endoscope images, or are they allowed under certain conditions to disassemble the engine, possibly with an FIA representative witnessing? Can they replace certain parts like maybe piston rings? So they definitely rely on oil analysis. That's a big part of what they do. Most of the big teams have their fuel and lubricant supplier. For example, Ferrari have Shell, and they set up at the back of the Ferrari garage a laboratory, a Shell laboratory. They have this big testing equipment that's built into this kind of box, this container, and they analyse the oil samples after every single session, every time the car's run, and by looking at that in detail they can tell if there are tiny particles of certain metals in there that might indicate wear, that kind of thing. So they definitely use that. They do endoscope, and for those who don't know what that is, it's like a great big sort of microscope on a long bendy kind of wire that they were able to slot down through the spark plug hole and look inside the cylinder and look very closely under magnified conditions, again to check for signs of wear and damage. So they do that regularly as well. And if they do find a problem, or even if they suspect a problem, they can notify the FIA and ask for permission to inspect that particular area of the engine. And in that case, they're allowed to break the seals, they are allowed to disassemble it, look at the problem. If they find a problem, they can show the FIA and get permission to replace a certain part. And depending on what the part is, they may or may not be allowed to do that under the regulations, within the rules. Obviously, as we well know, some of the parts that are restricted, if you have to replace one of those, then you take a penalty for it. The FIA have to be across that. They have to kind of witness it and see what's happening and be comfortable that no one's cheating. Parts have to be replaced like for like, and then the FIA will replace the seal once they're happy back on the engine when that job is done. So those things can be done, but they have to be done with the permission, and only with the permission, of the FIA. And to do that, to get that permission, you have to convince them of what the problem is and why you think it needs to be replaced or at least inspected. But certainly taking seals off the engines to inspect things, that's allowed as long as you get permission. When it comes to replacing parts that may be damaged, that's when you've got to have a deep conversation with the FIA. Darren Armstrong asked this question. He says, Hamilton's partly attributed his 2017 championship win to the team spirit instilled by example while handing that place back to Bottas early in the season. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the importance of a driver's attributes outside of the car, outside of the data. Perhaps the reason Alonso is not a triple world champion from 2007. And how do you think that has influenced... Shush! How do you think that's influenced the 2018 battle? Well, the importance of a driver's attributes outside of the car, they are important. And you mentioned 2007 there. I mean, that's a great example of where it all went wrong because of a driver's attributes both in and outside of the car. And I'm not talking about Alonso specifically there, because both drivers in 2007 very publicly didn't get on. They very publicly fought with each other, they clashed. And what the effect that had was that it spilled over into the rest of the team, and both sides of the team, both sets of mechanics and engineers, began to gather around their man, whether it be Alonso or Hamilton, and then the two halves of the whole garage ended up kind of fighting against each other, and that was kind of initiated because of this feud between the two drivers. So the team looked up to their drivers. They look towards their drivers for... Hey, shush! They look towards their drivers for leadership and inspiration. And so when a driver... Hey! Stop it! When a driver is not showing the kind of leadership and the kind of inspiration that you need as a team, well, apart from not having a great effect that it should have, it can actually have a detrimental effect. So absolutely, when a driver does great things in the car and then gets out of the car and says the right things, does the right things, shows appreciation to the team, and if you believe that's genuine, it really helps to galvanise a Formula One team, and of course that is what we all need. How do we think it's influenced the 2018 battle? I'm not sure. It's very difficult to say at this stage. Of course, we're still in it. And if you look at, I guess, the big battle, Ferrari and Mercedes, you've got to say the Ferrari team doesn't appear, at least from the outside, to be as well honed and as well tuned and as together as the Mercedes team is. If you think back to that incident, I forget which race it was, when James Vowles had to come on the radio and apologise to Lewis Hamilton for making a strategic error, if you like. That really showed and highlighted to me how nobody's afraid to own up and take responsibility for their actions, both good and bad. And I think that's a real sign of a very, very strong team that Mercedes have right now. Brett Black says, not sure if it's been covered, however, but with Red Bull's departure from Renault, do you think that Renault would have been holding back more upgrades for 2018, maybe saving them for 2019? No, I don't. I don't, and for two reasons. First of all, I don't think an engine manufacturer will ever hold back an upgrade, certainly not for 2019, because when it gets to 2019, that upgrade would be irrelevant. And secondly, Renault are in this very, very important and tight fight for fourth place in the championship. They can't afford to hold back performance because it will affect their own team as well as their customers. The rules now state that you have to supply your customers with the same technology that you as a manufacturer team are using, so they can't afford to do it. So the answer is no, it's not happening. Right, I'm just going through the editing process for today's video, and just one more question that I wanted to answer, and I've been desperately trying to find it, and I can't remember for the life of me who sent it to me. I really apologise if it was you, but it was a good question, so I wanted to try and answer it anyway just to finish the video. It was a technical question. It was asking about how Formula One cars use their ERS system, the energy recovery system, to help with the race start. And somebody asked me, does this happen? Do they use it in that way to help assist the cars get off the line? And yes, I thought it was really interesting because traction control's banned, but they'll use any tools that they have at their disposal to try and assist with this kind of thing. And the ERS system is absolutely one of those things. So to put it in a very kind of brief and short context, the ERS system at the race start is switched into its high recovery mode. That's the mode where normally as you're barreling down the straight heading towards a corner, it's in recovery mode. You see that little flashing light blinking away in the back of the car. It's harvesting energy. Now you wouldn't imagine that would be the case for the race start, but they put it in recovery mode just for the first maybe 1 to 2 seconds, the first phase of the start, the race launch. And what happens is if the tyres or the wheels start to break traction or get close to breaking traction, the energy recovery system will put a bit of resistance in there using the recovery mode, using that electric motor generator on the back of the car there to just put some resistance on the rear axle. Once it gets through the first phase of that race start and they get up to speed and the revs build up and the speed of the car begins to build up, it's gained traction, then it goes back into deploy mode, which is the mode that you'd imagine it would be in at the race start, where it gives it everything, full beans, full electrical deployment, as well as the internal combustion engine, everything it's got to then build up the power and build up the speed as it gets away after the first few meters. So just in the very initial phase, the ERS system is in recovery mode, which I think is quite an interesting fact that not everybody knows. And as I said, thank you for whoever it was to send me that question in. I really appreciate it. I thought it was a quite good one, and I hope that helps a little bit. Right, that is it for today. Thank you very much. I am off to Germany very early tomorrow morning, so Tuesday's video will be coming from Munich somehow. Thanks for all of the questions that have come in this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you're not already. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.